Great to be here, Chris.
All right, so nothing so much changed for Canada actually yesterday, but Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick certainly did say that tariffs against Canada could go up if Canada doesn't drop our own counter-tariffs against that country. So how likely do you think that threat could be?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump has made very clear that he basically wants countries to roll over and to submit to his demands. And the countries that retaliate are the ones that are still very much in the firing line. China, first and foremost. We've seen tariffs on China. Additionally, we're supposed to be 34%. They're now 125%. And number two, in terms of countries that are trying to stand their own ground, is Canada. So, there is a very real risk that in choosing to retaliate, which is perfectly understandable why Canada would do that. But as far as Donald Trump is concerned, that's not the fealty that he wants from countries around the world.
So given our size versus the United States, and that potential threat there, what would you be advising Canadian government to do in light of this?
Well, look, it's really, really unpalatable, but you can look at the way that the European Union has been handling this. They had drawn up a list of retaliatory measures and had begun to move towards doing that. It's harder for the EU to do something because they have to get 27 countries on side with whatever measures they take. They've paused their retaliation because Donald Trump has made clear that this 90-day pause that he's put in place is contingent on other countries not retaliating. So it's not great to say it, but I do think that turning the other cheek might be the best strategy right now, because simply you're dealing with a president in the White House who is really unencumbered. The policies that he's doing are clearly going to be harmful for Canada, but they're also very bad for America. And we're seeing that there is the beginnings of a domestic backlash in America, which ultimately will be the most important restraining force for Trump.
The messaging from the White House has certainly been all over the map. We've heard from Trump himself that his policies will never change. Then obviously the pause came in yesterday. And as he was saying that, he talked about how people were getting yippy and queasy with the markets. But he narrowed in on the bond market and said that the real sell-off there was one of the big reasons for why this pause kicked in. Can you explain to us, why is the bond market sell-off so important here?
Everybody pays attention to the stock market. It's where people are invested. It's where their retirement funds are. It's easy to kind of understand up and down what it means. The bond market underpins the financial system. Pardon me. The 10-year yield on U.S. Treasuries, which is really the most important price in the American economy, it ultimately underpins mortgages, it underpins long-term corporate borrowing. That had begun to decline, which is not a bad thing if you want to get the economy going, below 4%. But in the past week, it shot from roughly 3.8 to 4.4%. That's a huge, huge swing in the bond market. It implied that investors were beginning to lose their faith in the American economy. They were wondering about its governance. They were wondering about its reliability. And ultimately, if you've got the stock market going down, but you also have bond yields going up, it potentially is the recipe for the beginnings of a financial crisis. There were real stresses that were building in the financial system. As Donald Trump himself reportedly said, he wouldn't mind, he could stomach there being a recession. What he was worried about was that his policies were going to lead to a depression. And that appears to be the line that he drew, is that he doesn't mind a bit of a stock market sell-off. He does not want to be the author of the next Great Depression. Not terribly comforting, but that seems to be the thing that ultimately turned around his policies yesterday and led to the pause that we all now see.
Not comfortable at all, but also even just recession is certainly something that a lot of people are fearing. How likely do you think that is at this point?
Well, look, it was fairly amusing after the pause yesterday. You had in recent days, as the market sold off, as bond yields went up, a whole series of financial analysts coming out and saying that the belief that possibly there would be a recession this year had gone up quite dramatically. They were talking about 60% chance, 70% chance. He comes out with a 90-day pause, and suddenly you have all of these notes coming in saying, well, actually, we're back to maybe a 45% chance or a 50-50 chance. In other words, it basically is a coin flip. He is playing a really, really high stakes game with the economy. If you look at the overall average tariff rate that Americans will pay on their imports, it's still in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%, even after this pause. I mean, that's the highest since the Great Depression. It's the highest in a century, up dramatically in the space of 2 months. That's going to put a lot of pressure on consumers. It's going to make it very, very difficult for businesses to invest. It's very difficult for analysts to ultimately say, does that mean there will or will not be a recession? The odds of a recession are up dramatically compared to where they were at the beginning of this year. He inherited a very, very strong economy, and he really has run it off the tracks.
And I know part of the reason why a recession is still quite a likely possibility here is because even though the reciprocal tariffs right around the world may have been dropped for nations, China still has pretty epic reciprocal tariffs on them. They announced yesterday 84% tariffs against the states, and then the United States raised it even higher to that 125% number. How far do you see that going, this fight between China and the U.S.?
Well, it doesn't appear that there's any, resolution in sight. I mean, the 125% tariffs are obviously extreme. China, in terms of retaliation, also has tariffs of nearly that level on America. So, you can imagine trade between the two countries almost coming to a standstill. But there is a basic problem, which is that China is the biggest supplier of consumer goods to America. The one way in which Americans are really going to immediately feel the impact from this trade war is seeing prices rising in the grocery stores, in the department stores, and their online shopping apps. That is going to happen because of these tariffs that have been placed on China. In some ways, the best hope right now for America is that a lot of these Chinese exports will be rerouted through other countries, which long-term is not something that America wants to see. Is there a possible resolution? Donald Trump wants to have direct leader-to-leader talks with Xi Jinping, the leader of China. As far as China is concerned, though, they saw what happened to Vladimir Zelensky when he showed up in the White House. They don't want to have Xi Jinping getting onto a phone call with President Trump, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, having it being totally unpredictable. So China wants to have kind of lower level dialogue to kind of set up this leader-to-leader talk. But the way that the White House is working, there's no lower level official who really has the authority to do that. So you kind of have this bizarre impasse between two extremely different systems that ultimately at this current juncture are very much leader-led, one-person systems. And how it all comes together is still a guessing game.
Well, and the timing of yesterday's announcement from Donald Trump is something that is being called into question as well. Of course, it happened right in the middle of the day there, this 90-day pause that Trump announced on those reciprocal tariffs. And of course, that follows earlier in the day, he had posted on Truth Social, buy. And now Democratic Senator Adam Schiff wants a look at market manipulation and a probe into that. What do you think might come of that probe?
I wouldn't expect all that much coming out of it, because any probe is going to have to go through Congress, and some of the fingers that are being pointed are at members of Congress themselves. Look, it doesn't smell good. It's not the first thing that doesn't smell right, though, about the current administration. I think, in fairness to Donald Trump, he did send out that Truth Social message early in the morning, so he did let the world know that he thought it was a good time to buy stocks. I think it's a fairly ugly sideline story to all of this. It's really not the main event. There may well be members of his administration, or broadly more speaking of the Congress, who may have enriched themselves. That's obviously not something that anybody should approve of. But nevertheless, the big story still is his trade policies, what they mean for the global economy, what they mean for the American economy, and how he's just running a massive, massive risk right now with the prosperity of Americans and the prosperity of people around the world. Fascinating discussion. Simon, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Thank you very much, Chris. Simon Rabinovitch is U.S. economics editor at The Economist, and he's joining us in Washington.